Gabe Groisman, shalom.
Shalom, Yoni.
Senior advisor to the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, host of the Standpoint podcast, of course, also former mayor of Belle Harbor. You're here leading a delegation, an important delegation. Tell us about it.
So we're here this week with 15 chiefs of staff of governors from across the United States, bringing them here on a solidarity mission, visiting the South, understanding more about the war, what's happening, and really understanding the core of what's driving anti-Semitism, or what we see is driving anti-Semitism around the United States, which is this misinformation campaign against Israel. They want to come and learn and see it for themselves so they can come back and bring to their governors and to their states the truth of what's actually happening in Israel.
So tell us about the visit. Yesterday, you visited the South, the demolished kibbutzim.
Yeah, it was very powerful. Look, this is the third time I've been back since October 7th. And every time it's so difficult. It's difficult to see what the devastation of what Hamas did on that terrible day. We were in Kibbutz Be'eri. We were walked around by a resident of the community. And I can tell you, having been there in November, seeing now what the kibbutz looks like. In November, it looked like an army base. It was total chaos of what was happening with Zaka, and everybody was there. Today, you see a kibbutz where they've really beautified the kibbutz again. It's back to in parts of it, back to its original beauty, which is even more difficult to see, because then you make a turn and you see the rows of the homes that were devastated and the people who were murdered and taken there, and you get to see almost the yin and the yang of the beauty of life in the south of Israel, and then what happened on that day. And then after Kibbutz Be'eri, we went to the Nova Music Festival. We had 2 survivors from the festival take the group there and walk them through what happened to them and to everybody at the festival, which anyone who hasn't been there should go down there. It's an open site.
How did the participants react?
They were shaken to the core.
Wow.
They all said the same thing, which is they were all familiar with what happened on October 7th. They were familiar about what happened at the Nova Music Festival, but nothing compared to being there and hearing the stories from the kids, because they were kids that were there, from them themselves on the site. And it was really just, it shook them, and they were very happy really isn't the word, but they were very glad that they came to be able to see it themselves.
Opportunity to see it from up close. Now you're connecting this to anti-Semitism, because some would say it's a war between states, between entities, but you're saying no, this is part of the history, the decades of anti-Semitism.
So October 7th, for 2-3 days in the United States, not more than that, the Jewish community thought, okay, this was the moment where everyone's going to rally around us, and this wave of anti-Semitism that's been growing for the last decade in the United States and around the world is, maybe it's going to come to a pause, or maybe even an end, because people will see the reality. But as we all know, the opposite happened, and it's opened the floodgates of anti-Semitism around the United States and around the world. And now local governments, when you're talking about safety, public safety in the United States, it's handled primarily by governors and mayors. And the safety of the Jewish community around the country is at stake. And the governors and mayors have to make these decisions on how to protect the community, how much resources to put behind. And a lot of the anti-Semitism is being hidden behind anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiment. So the governors really need to learn, the nuances of the Israel conflict themselves, so they can answer the lies that are being put in front of them every day.
One of the important things to note and to emphasize is that these protests didn't begin when the IDF started fighting back. When the IDF entered the Gaza Strip, it began just a few days after the massacre, right?
Yeah, immediately. The day after, on October 8th, there were already rallies on the streets in the United States against Israel, telling Israel not to respond. We know the United States, it's come out since October 7th, immediately told Israel, don't respond with rage. Don't come in too strong like we did in Afghanistan and in Iraq, right? I mean, immediately the walls went up from the community, the outside the Jewish community, the anti-Semitic community in the United States, which today is being driven by the far left in the United States. Unfortunately, of course, the far right also has its fair share of anti-Semites, but we're seeing the protests we're seeing on the streets, the pro-Hamas, they're not anti-Israel protests, they're pro-Hamas protests all over our country. They're being driven by the far left in our country.
Now, there's one thing what's happening on the streets, but how do you relate to what we're seeing from the White House, from Washington, basically, to Israel, basically the United States saying to Israel, don't?
Yeah, it's interesting. So first of all, on this, I'm speaking on my own, not on behalf of any organization. But what we've seen is the first month, 2 months, the United States was 100% behind Israel. The Biden administration, I think across the board, right to left, everybody said made the right first moves vis-a-vis Israel and the war. But little by little, we're seeing that support wane. We've seen them try to play both sides of the conflict. And when you don't have moral clarity, you open the doors. And weakness is seductive, which is something that Churchill said many years ago. And that's what we're seeing out of the Biden administration today.
So what should Israel do at this point? We saw the video from the Prime Minister. We're seeing Defense Minister Gallant there in Washington trying to change the picture, trying to change the situation.
I think from my perspective, Israel has to take into account what the United States and its allies think, but Israel cannot allow the United States and other foreign countries to define what Israel does for its own security. If Israel needs to finish the job in Gaza, which I think they do, there's no question about it, they need to do it no matter whether the United States and the European Union and all these other supposed friends actually support Israel there. And the same in the north. Israel shouldn't be asking permission to push Hezbollah back behind the Litani River. They should be doing it on behalf of the 80,000 residents that are displaced. So I think the nuance that I would love to see out of Israel is, of course, try to bring along the United States and bring along the other allies. I think the United States will come along eventually. I think what we're seeing out of the Biden administration is a little bit of barking, a little bit of political positioning for the upcoming election. But at the end of the day, they understand, I believe this at my core, that even the Biden administration understands and the Europeans understand that Israel must defend itself even on the northern border. And they're going to, at the end of the day, stand with Israel because people stand with winners and people stand behind strong nations, and Israel is that.
Now, as part of the visit of the delegation, you're going to be visiting also Judea and Samaria. We know of your connection to Judea and Samaria, but this is a statement, bringing them there.
It's absolutely a statement. Look, the entire land of Israel is what that is. It's the land of Israel, and we can't make differentiations between different areas. And many of the people in our delegation are non-Jews, are Christians, and we know that the holy sites of the Bible, both for the Jews and the Christians, are mostly in Judea and Samaria, behind this invisible green line that people pretend they don't cross. And it's critical. And it's critical also for them to see, because in the United States, we're seeing statements about what's happening in the quote-unquote West Bank and with violence from one side or the other. So we're going to take them there to see it and to understand the security situation there, because today all eyes are on Gaza and on Hamas. But tomorrow, the day Abbas dies, we all know there's going to be a civil war in the Palestinian territories and the cities controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And what's going to happen then? We have to start educating our policymakers in the United States today on that. And that's a conversation I think is not even happening in Israel. But I've taken it upon myself to have that conversation with anyone that will listen, because that's the fight that we're going to have tomorrow.
Okay, let's go back to anti-Semitism back home in the United States. What are your demands from the administration, from the authorities?
Today, the number one issue when it comes to anti-Semitism in the United States is very simple. It's public safety. The number one obligation of a government is to keep its residents safe. Right now, the Jewish community, by and large in the United States, is not safe, and it does not feel safe, and there's reason for it, and we've seen images of violent clashes all over the country.
Just recently also in Los Angeles.
Absolutely. So we need our governors, our mayors, our federal government to stand behind the law enforcement community to protect the Jewish community all over our country. That's first and foremost. Second of all, we're seeing such a rise of anti-Semitism at universities all across our country. It's not just in the Ivy Leagues. Our universities are funded to the tune of billions and billions of dollars by foreign entities, by countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. We need to get rid of that foreign funding, and China as well. We just need to get rid of foreign funding at universities. There's no reason why our universities need to be funded by countries that hate us and the countries that are pushing ideologies to our youth, because that's exactly what's happening.
Could you legislate against that?
Absolutely. And there are conversations happening, hearings happening in Congress. That is a function of Congress, not of the White House. And we're pushing them right now. Many people around the United States are pushing them. First, let's shine a light on the foreign funding. When people see the amount of money that's going to these universities, they're going to start asking the questions, and then the legislation, I think, will follow. And the second is, again, in the universities, to protect the Jewish community, to treat the Jewish community the same way you would treat any other community. For example, no university in the United States of America would put up with rallies and chants of genocide of the black community, nor should they, or of the gay community, nor should they. But when it comes to the Jewish community, every excuse in the book is brought up as to why it's okay. treat the Jewish community the same way as you treat every other community. That's all we're asking for.
And it's very important to understand that the quiet that relative quiet that we're seeing on campus is just because of summer break. It's obvious to everyone that it'll go back and it'll be full throttle.
Sure, this is going to come back in the fall. I've had a few people say, "Oh, you see, it's over. The university clashes are over," and it's almost a silly comment because the universities, not only some of them are in session in summer, but it's maybe 10-15% of the population that's there. But also a lot of the campuses that are private campuses in the summer have actually closed their gates. And if you don't have an ID, you're not coming in. And we also have learned that many of the rallies and protests and encampments that we're seeing at universities, a large percentage of them, 30-40% at times, are outside agitators that are there that will agitate the student body and get them going to say the right chants, to say the crazy things, because that's what they're trying to do, is divide our nation.
As you mentioned, it's not your first time here. You come a lot, and let me guess that it gives you lots of strength, right? It adds energy to what you're doing back home in America.
I think it absolutely adds a lot of strength to we're on Israel National News, so I could say to my neshama, to my soul, just being in Israel, being connected here as much as possible. But I also think today, just coming to Israel is a statement, because those of us who come a lot, we just come. But it is the middle of a war, right? And to bring a delegation of chiefs of staff, of government across Israel right on a regular day is a nice thing to do. But in the middle of the war, it's a statement. But it's a statement that also brings us strength, because in the United States and abroad, those of us who love Israel watch the news every single day of what's happening. We wait for the names, just like here, when you all wait for the names to see if we recognize one of the soldiers who died or whether there's some news about the hostages. But coming here strengthens me, because it reminds me the resilience of the Israeli people. The restaurants are full, the coffee shops are full, and people are worried to death about what's happening, but they're still living, and getting a little bit of that taste when I'm in Israel is something that brings me a lot of strength.
Gabriel Groisman, thank you very much for coming to the studio. Thank you very much for coming to Israel, and thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you, Yoni.